notice that like your attempts of avoiding this have not worked out for you in the long term. If you already feel like you're missing out on things, listen to that and ask yourself, what's like the next step? Like, what do you need to learn? As an exposure therapist, I'm always asking patients, what do you need to learn next? If you feel like you're missing out on whatever it is, you're listening to this podcast, you're clearly taking a step, I'd ask yourself now, like, what is the next step to take? And what's like the experience you're not willing to have? And can you design an exposure for yourself where you can experience what you're not willing to experience right now in order for you to learn something that's going to be adaptive?
Hello, and thank you for joining us today as we go beyond the couch and explore the world of AI in psychology. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde, a psychologist and AI strategist, and I want to welcome you to Beyond the Couch, AI in Psychology. Okay, so before we get started, I always want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors without whom this show would not be possible. The American Board of Professional Psychology, also known as ABAP, the National Register of Health Service Psychologists, and Wayde AI, my AI consulting company. Okay, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Andrew Sherrill to the show today. Now, Dr. Sherrill is a professor at Emory University who specializes in treating anxiety, PTSD, and OCD. His work combines exposure therapy with new tech like VR and AI to make treatments more effective and easier to use. He also has a very interesting perspective on how AI can help clinicians by taking on the dirty, dull, and dangerous tasks while keeping clinicians at the center of patient care. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, Andrew, and I really want to get into your perspective and some of the work you do. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about your background and how'd you get into working with exposure therapy and AI?
Yeah, I think for folks that don't know me, a good way to think of me is as an exposure therapist at his heart. Right? I'm not a technology person. I'm a true believer in exposure therapy for anxiety and trauma-related conditions. And I'm interested in exposure therapy because I was trained in evidence-based practices. So when it came down to decide, what treatments to invest my career in, it was the treatments that had the most evidence. So as an exposure therapist, I don't say it's my job. It's like equal parts clinical work, research, teaching, and it's the scientist practitioner model where everything kind of blends in and feeds into each other. When I think about exposure therapy, when I do exposure therapy, I'm always considering how can we be as efficient as possible? How can we scale treatment? How can we make it as easy as possible for therapists to do it? How can we make it rewarding for everybody to do it? It's a type of modality that I find very fulfilling and fun, and I find a lot of joy in it. Even when I'm working with pretty serious content like trauma, for example. And my generation, the millennial psychologists and younger, I think our mission isn't so much identifying the effective treatments. I think the prior generation did a great job with that. Our generation is more in charge of identifying how to best package these treatments, how to deliver them, how to augment them. How do we really get them in the hands of people that need them the most? And this is where technology comes in. Now, technology has existed since the dawn of time to make things more convenient for humans. So even fire, the wheel, right? We used to see that as a technology. Yeah, so it's only natural that a person in any field will look at technology as a way of making their work more effective and more convenient. And so at first, initially, I was very interested in VR. I still do VR work. I'm interested in exploring new applications with augmented reality. We have a couple grants in now that might be looking at the Apple Vision Pro, those types of devices where we can really blend like physical realities and artificial realities. We've developed apps that make it easier for patients to engage in exposure therapy between sessions and communicate with their therapist about what they did during their exposures. And then now, in the last few years, last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, I've been personally really interested in AI for all the possible applications that you can use in exposure therapy to make learning exposure therapy easier, to make the generation of stimuli easier, to be creative and brainstorm with patients to make that easier. And again, like it's all goes back down to the idea of, I think this is the best therapy there is for these conditions. And, we can always work on making them, more effective and easier to access. So that's most of my interest. Although outside of that, I'm not really a technology person. I'm just a fanboy of exposure therapies and want to spread the love.
I love that you're taking your interest, which is exposure therapy, and thinking about how AI can be used to help improve that for the people that you work with. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. But tell us what you mean when you said that the dirty, dull, and dangerous tasks that AI can help with that. What does that mean? Help us understand what you
Yeah.
mean.
So we take a big step back and look at all of technology, or especially automation. Like, why does it exist in the first place? And it's usually to take care of tasks that humans don't want to do. And you can put these into three categories often: dirty, dull, and dangerous. This is a heuristic that is often used in the robotics field. So let's think about like robots that we all know and love. You think of Wally, right? That little trash compactor from the movie Wally.
Yeah, I remember that. My
Did
kids love that.
he did the dirty tasks, right? He cleaned up all this trash, right? And uh, when we think of a dull robot, dull tasks, we think of like robots like Rosie from the Jetsons. She tidied up the house, she cleaned up a bit, she kept the house organized. Um, a lot of people don't want to do those domestic chores in their home, so Rosie exists in the Jetsons world. When we think of dangerous tasks, think of the Terminator from the movie The Terminator. This guy was a killing machine, right? There's a lot of movies that explore the possibility of that type of dangerous task being taken over by automation. Uh, these all humans could do all these tasks, but we prefer not to. Uh, and there are lessons we can learn from pop culture just as much as we can learn from the academic literature of how these tasks uh, are a challenge even for the robots. So if you think of Wally, who does the dirty tasks, he actually was a hoarder. He would actually, instead of throwing things away, he would save a few things, and he had a bunch of like a collection of things he held on to. If you
Yeah,
think of Rosie, she complained a bunch about her job. She didn't like doing all the mundane tasks. And then, of course, the Terminator in the wrong hands, like would be targeted towards the good guys rather than the bad guys. And so that's what I've always been interested in. Is like not just like the tasks you could take over, but understanding the shortcomings of it. How do we interact with these agents that take care of these tasks in a way that ensures that they continue to do the job they were designed to do, while we still protect the things that we want to do. You know,
yeah.
there's some automation that uh, you know we might not want to give up to robots. I think of uh, well, lately I've been thinking about don't take this the wrong way. Um, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but I think uh, people are aware that sex robots are now like being developed, and people are paying a lot of money for sex robots. And I'm not sure if that's an automation we want to have. At least not for everybody. Maybe some people it might fill a really important need. But for the most part, the ability to have the social skills to date and to have consensual sex with another person, like, these are good things for society. And I think if we just gave a bunch of young men sex robots, I think it'd be to our demise.
Yeah.
So when we think about robots and automation, we want to think, I like to call them the 4Ds. It's like the dirty, the dull, the dangerous, and then the don'ts.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I think when I think of exposure therapy, there's that heuristic applies to everything that we do as exposure therapists. I think for exposure therapy and a lot of evidence-based therapies, our barriers are tasks that we give a clinician that are really hard to do, that are hard to do because they're either very dirty. What I mean by dirty, I mean like noisy data, things that are kind of hard to figure out. Like, is my patient getting better? Is my approach culturally sensitive and efficient? When I think of dull, it's like note writing. It's like gathering materials, things like that. And then dangerous, I love to talk about the dangerous tasks. That's like things that we're afraid to even ask about or do. Like clinicians don't want to risk asking, like, am I falling in love with my patient? Am I being unethical? Could I do this with a patient, like this untried technique? Right. So yeah, so I think we look at all of our
So let,
jobs in
so
intelligence.
let's apply this in the setting, right? In the clinical
Yeah.
setting. Where do you see AI, LM supporting but not replacing? Because we've talked about some things where it replaces and there's like some of those are dangerous and not appropriate. Where do you see it supporting but not replacing the therapeutic relationship and the therapy?
Yeah, but in all of our jobs, I've talked probably in the weeds with exposure therapy for a bit. Uh, when we look at all of our jobs, we can. So people say automation is going to replace our jobs. Now that might happen with a lot of jobs. I think mostly when we look at innovation with AI, it's mostly replacing tasks than jobs. There's a big field, not so much, it's coming to the clinical site, but it's called human AI teaming. So people have looked at this for a long time in construction and uh, manufacture. So when we look at it, we look at tasks. So when we look at our jobs, like with our patients, one way you can look at it is think about all the tasks you do. And we actually just did a study on this where we found that most clinicians that will identify about 80 different tasks that they do. There's many that you would never want to give up to automation, things that you find very precious and you feel like you're good at and want to do. But there's a lot of tasks that people don't want to do, and those are often the dirty, dull, and dangerous. And that's going to be person to person. Some people might love generating exposure materials and would never want to give it up to automation. Some people, they're like, oh, I got to find this or I got to do this. And they would love to have support for that. But that's going to be very person to person. Like, I'll ask you this. I feel like I've been talking too much. Um, in your job, in your clinical work, do you find there's any like dangerous tasks that you wish you didn't have to do or you had some kind of support with? And when I would say dangerous, I don't mean like physically dangerous necessarily, but risky things, where you kind of feel like it'd be nice to have an objective partner with you that wouldn't judge you, that would be kind of reliable and immediate. Can you think of anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, one of the things that it always feels like it'd be nice, helpful to have that second opinion is when I'm, doing a diagnosis, right? When it's this is what I think, but maybe somebody else might see something differently, and like, does this actually fit what's in the DSM, or actually fit in the qualification, or could it be interpreted this way or that? So that might be an example of one.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people have that exact concern where they wish they had that second opinion that was right there available to them. And also, it doesn't have to be like the right opinion. I feel like often we talk about automation needing to be very accurate. That's one characteristic for why people might use AI. And I think we might not even want to rely on it for accuracy. But I'll say sometimes we just want a colleague, not because they know better, but just it helps to have somebody else to bounce ideas with. But we often don't do that because we're maybe embarrassed because we might disclose something that we don't want people to know. Like for example, recently, I had never diagnosed avoidant personality disorder before. I have a tendency to kind of view that presentation as more social anxiety, and I was embarrassed to talk to a colleague about like, did I have the right information to make this diagnosis? And with automation, we could get rid of that embarrassment. We can, and our colleague, our synthetic agent might be wrong, but there's less risk because we know they're not going to judge us or say, hey, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about with his personality.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's some research that I'm aware of that was done um, by an organization that was trying to figure out, well, what are people using AI for in terms of like a therapeutic mental health settings and things like that. And the research found that younger adults were actually more likely and more comfortable with using AI because of exactly that, right? Things that they were embarrassed about, and the sense that they weren't going to be judged by the AI than by a human in that same setting. And so there is a sense, but from some people at least especially the younger generation, that AI helps to prevent some of that embarrassment, that concern that you're talking.
Yep, because often people want to have that feedback that could be risky for their identities or the impression management. They want that, but there are often real consequences. So I'm the training director of a training program that trains people in PE across the country, and part of that program is uh, reviewing recordings of people's PE administration. So that's prolonged exposure for PTSD. And almost everybody, especially if they're established in the field and they haven't done graduate training for 10, 20 years, there's always this initial embarrassment. It's almost like an exposure in itself to have them give a recording of their therapy to a consultant and get feedback. But once they overcome that and they can see that it's useful to do that, they crave more and more of it. And I think there are people that are signing up to do this. I imagine there's just a huge population of clinicians who are really stifling themselves in their development because of this block. It'd be too dangerous for them
Yeah.
to let. We'll see how they do their job.
So let me ask you. So because we're talking about using AI sort of as a colleague in some ways, a tool still, but some performing some of the functions that a colleague would do. Where do you draw the line, right? Where is the line that you need to be mindful of if you're someone who wants to do this? Because certainly there is a line. Where do you think that line should be? What should you be mindful of when you're using it in that setting?
Yeah, yeah. No, so that's a great question. So this is what our team is looking at. So we have a National Science Foundation grant that's about two things: building one of these machines that can do this, give you feedback on your delivery of exposure therapy. But also the other side of it is like not just can we do it, but like how should we do it? What are those lines, those ethical lines, those lines for best effectiveness? What are those implications for the workplace? Once these things are rolled out, and we're trying to figure that out. I think it's going to be very task dependent, and it's going to require some new like uh, competencies on the clinician side to be able to understand like what that synthetic agent can and cannot do. Like when it comes to writing reports or writing research, I like to think about usually the current LLMs as almost being like a very bright uh, graduate student that might not have the wisdom, uh, of the whole field, but they can generate information and write pretty quickly. When I think of therapy, I think about thinking about them almost like a person who has read a treatment manual back to front a million times, but has never actually seen a patient. So to take things with a grain of salt. So what we developed so far in our tool, it's not ready for prime time yet. What we found out is uh, a part of how we built it was we built a lot of synthetic data. We took about 600 recordings of PE and then thousands and thousands of synthetic PE recordings that we generated. And we found that these LLMs do a really good job uh, describing and identifying a very basic level of how therapy works. So when you see, like, if you're asking, anybody could do it now, ask ChatGPT to generate a transcript of, exposure and response prevention for OCD. On the surface, if you're not trained in therapy, it's going to look like therapy. It's going to sound like it has a therapeutic flow. But a trained eye will look at it and see that it's really bad therapy, actually, where there's a lot of avoidance being incurred. So I'd say I would think about it that way. It's hard to train these models in the clinical insights or the wisdoms that we have that determine moment to moment decisions with patients and how to identify the things that uh, are either consistent or not consistent with your theoretical model.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be my guidance. Go task by task and then think about it like a person, but remember they're not a person, but with certain limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think of it kind of like the person, but remember that they are not a person and that you definitely need to validate whatever it is that they're telling you, right? You can't take it at face value. That's really important.
Oh,
Now,
well, I was going to say, the reason why I say like treat them like a person is the way these models, we're talking about LLMs specifically, the way they're
yeah.
trained is as conversational agents.
Hmm.
The interface is actually brilliant for most of these, and this is what we're building into our tool. There's open text boxes where you kind of chat back and forth like we do with text or just natural language, right? And so there are so many things we do that are brilliant coding, brilliant prompts that we do in our everyday lives between humans that these things have taken advantage of. So the subtle differences between how you ask questions or the contextual information you might give people, that's giving you good feedback. So when you're using these modern techniques, just if you treat them like a human and you talk to them almost like a human, you're going to get a specific response back. Now we can talk about prompt engineering a bit, how you might want to change that, but there's a lot of value of thinking about these things as actually having some agency. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really important is even before people get to that point, right? There's right now there's a lot of fear and anxiety around using AI and AI in general. So, how can some of the principles of exposure therapy guide clinicians and patients to learn and work with AI and technologies to become more comfortable with it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say like let's get into the weeds with exposure therapy a bit. One thing I tell people with AI is, there's a line in the AI field. It's like it's not like AI is going to take our jobs, but humans that use AI are going to take our jobs. And I think there is an imperative for people to get exposed to it and understand it, maybe sooner than they might be comfortable with. And in our field, we tend to be technophobic. We get into this field because we like human connection, right? We're not the technology folks. And I'd say the first step in exposure therapy is just acknowledging and validating that there is some anxiety, there is some hesitation, and there is avoidance. And what we know about anxiety conditions, not to say technophobia is an anxiety condition, but what we know about them is that they're maintained by avoidance and unhelpful thinking that's never challenged by because of that avoidance. So first step would be like just validating that it's there. And one way you can notice that it's there is like your lack of use of it. If you haven't tried playing around with it, even in your own personal life, there might be some anxiety there. So the first step I'd say is validating it. And then identifying like why it might be important. If people are listening to this, they're already at that point, they're at the contemplation stage. They're seeing how this might be consistent with their values. So after you validate that and see like why it would be important to face this fear, then you generate a list of things like a hierarchy, right? A list of different exposures you can do that are going to vary in how challenging they are. And then after that, you start with easier ones. Don't go straight to using it with a patient or with your training. Try using it with your friends, like play a game with it. Now ask ChatGPT to set up a very specific trivia game, and it'll do that in a second. So make your way up that hierarchy. And then with any good exposure, you're allowing yourself to be anxious. You want to push the boundaries. Get outside your comfort zone. You want to not avoid with it either, too. You want to make sure you're not doing any safety behaviors or maybe having too much fun with it as a way of avoiding. You want to actually connect with the anxiety for long enough to notice that you can handle it and that anxiety goes down. And ideally, you can talk to somebody about this. So I love the idea of people doing their own exposures with technology, like as a team. Uh, and then after that, like begin to be creative. Identify like how this could be helpful for your work. Now, going back to dirty, dull, and dangerous, almost all the discussions people have are about the dull tasks. This is kind of like the painkiller idea. Like most people might be interested in automation or technology because it's their pain points, but technologies are also like a vitamin, something that can maybe enhance your health. And especially with those dirty and dangerous tasks, I think this is once people identify you could do the dull tasks, people are going to get more excited to do dirty and dangerous tasks that make uh, that gives them more capacity and freedom to do the things that they truly loved. So after you're kind of more acquainted with using these LLMs, be creative and see, okay, here's one dangerous thing I don't like talking about. Let me see if I could talk to ChatGPT about like this kind of ethical kind of like a dilemma I'm facing, or like, I'm really struggling kind of to create some materials for patients. I view that as kind of like a dangerous task too. Anything that's clinically related like that, where you can do harm, I'd call it dangerous. Play around with that. See what it look like if you did some treatment planning or created some materials. Um, so yeah, once people are creative and if that creativity is linked to the things they care about in their job, then I'd predict that avoidance, that anxiety would go down a lot. It's
Yeah.
more bad.
I love this. I love this whole feeling of using, evidence-based approaches to help psychologists reduce their anxiety and their fears and concerns about the use of AI. I think it's so brilliant and so appropriate. And you've talked a little bit about some of the advantages in terms of, reducing those dirty, dull, and dangerous things. Talk a little about the other side, right? What's the risk that you run if you fall out of the loop of keeping up with what's going on in these fields?
Yeah, yeah. I think let's see. Well, to go back to the like using exposure to address your own technophobia, and I'll connect this to what you just asked. Like, I would want to remind people, like, they already did this with telehealth. The conditions during the pandemic were perfect for exposure therapy. So we all had to do it, had to kind of make that transition. Like, less than 20% of people ever use telehealth, and now almost everybody uses it. And it's because we all were in a position where we had to do it. We're given grace to kind of explore it. Even our patients were graceful with us. Our employees were graceful with us. So we had the chance to make mistakes without aversive consequence. And really quickly, we learned that it was very valuable and not dangerous at all. And so people are never going to go back from it. Um, so at first, it seemed like a dangerous thing to do somehow. And quickly, we developed like a trust with the technology. And that often happens with technology integration. At first, this is what they call this the AI effect, I think. Uh, at first, AI, it's hard to define what AI is. I like to define it as like computation that seems human-like. And usually when a person sees an AI device, it has this magical feeling like, oh my gosh, that is intelligence. Then after you use it, you realize it's just computation. You don't consider it artificial intelligence anymore. So the goalposts keep on moving. And that happens with our dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks. Uh, Even our definition of what we think is dull, dirty, and dangerous is always changing because we're getting better and better at our jobs, and so is that technology. So a lot of people have talked about in your podcast about like note writing and all these like dull tasks it could take over. Um, uh, I want to go into the dirty and dangerous and talk about my journey with this a bit to show you like how now I don't even view it as like a dirty or dangerous position anymore because with experience, they again feel more routine now, almost as if like it's a part of my workflow. It doesn't feel like I'm integrating anything, right? So let's talk about exposure therapy. One thing, uh, one challenge with exposure therapy is every person is unique. Every person has idiographic fears. They come from very specific cultural contexts. A good exposure therapist knows theory really well and uses creativity to identify what are those exposures they need to engage with to learn something new about themselves. And I've noticed beyond AI, folks gravitate towards using exposure exercises, metaphors, and approaches that are in the book. If people feel like it's just risky to deviate at all from like examples that are put inside of a manual, those examples are often there just because there needs to be an example. What's more important is understanding how to apply theory. So just deviating from like a prepackaged exercise or metaphor feels like a dangerous thing to do, like you're taking a risk with a patient. And also, one other area, so that's surprising your therapy, especially exposure therapy, feels like it could be dangerous. Absolutely not. I think we need to be doing that. That's something I'm going to talk about in a second about how we can use AI to achieve. But also, there's this dirty aspect or noisy aspect about all of our therapies. Is your patient getting better? Do we have the right therapeutic alliance? Am I being sufficiently? This is really dirty data, noisy data that's hard for us to understand. There's really neat tools out there that are helping us identify that. I can't share with you how I'm using that tool yet because we don't have good data on that, but I want to say that's on the horizon. I want to talk about the dangerous stuff. Okay, exposure therapy, again, one of the keys with it is setting people up. It's about activating the experiences and the thoughts and the urges that they're not willing to have. That's the target of exposure therapy. And the way we target it is by creating these situations that activates those unwanted experiences. And, for hardcore exposure therapists, we all have knives in our drawers. Like I have one right here for people with intrusive thoughts about harming themselves. We have ways of creating vomit. We have pet spiders in our offices. And this has been a barrier for a lot of people. People are like, I don't want to keep spiders and vomit and knives in my office to do exposure therapy. And it makes sense. That's fine. Uh, that has been a barrier for folks not having access to that. But with these LLMs, in a HIPAA compliant way, you can generate so many different types of exposure stimuli that don't just help your patient have access to exposures. My experience has shown me that it helps patients get excited to do exposure therapy. So behind me is my VR system. I've had a lot of people not wanting to face their fears, but they're interested in technology, so they'll use the VR. I had young people that are like, I don't want to talk about my fear of flying, but what graphics card do you got in that machine? The same thing with AI. People are excited by AI. They like that it's immediate, that it's personalized, that they find it interesting. So I'm going to quickly go through different exposures I've done with patients using a variety of tools. The tool I use the most is ChatGPT. GPT-5 right now has been extremely helpful for things. But just to list off a few things, like 2D images, really easy to create. So if, for a person with body dysmorphic disorder, right, they would never wear they'd only wear loose-fitting clothes. I was able to take some of their photos of themselves and alter them so that, and this is, by the way, two things. As a therapist, you can either use it, or ideally, you have the patient use it themselves. And I think
Hmm.
One thing we can accept in our field is that a lot of folks are already using this. So we either tell them not to use it, or we can guide them on how to use it in a way that's consistent with our evidence-based protocols. So this patient, she uploaded some pictures of herself and asked uh, uh, Dolly to change her clothes. Right, it's pretty good at this, at changing people's outfits. So it took the same pictures of the patient, and on her own device, she consented to do this. She was wearing more form-fitting clothes. Or like illness anxiety disorder, I was able to have a patient take a picture of their skin, and then Dolly was able to put some like a skin condition on their skin, so they were able to look at what their body would look like if they did have a skin condition.
Wow.
I've done 3D images too, like with the Apple Vision Pro. With the headset on, use one platform called Mesh.ai. They're able to create their own toilet with fecal matter on the toilet and put that toilet in their own room using augmented reality. One thing I've done with audio, I think it was 11 Labs. We for a person who had a lot of intrusive taboo thoughts, we created an audio file of a very specific voice going through all their taboo thoughts. For a person with that didn't like their name being called by a trauma patient that didn't like their name being called by a deep male voice, we created a deep male voice calling out their name. And all these stimuli that don't exist or might be unethical to do or might be otherwise impossible to create, you can create within a minute.
Yeah.
LMs do a great job with that.
I love that. I think that's so cool how the LLMs can really help you in the work that you're doing. And you talked about some really great examples there. What do you think in terms of continuing to make sure that we're staying involved in how these tools are being developed and used? What are some of the things that we need to be mindful of from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I will say, like, a lot of technologists are looking to recruit, clinicians to work with in a lot of different ways. So I'd say one way we can directly work with people developing things as a way to stay involved. Now, some people might not choose to do that. As a user of this, think about the phrase we use in this field of the clinician in the loop or the human in the loop, and to think about how easy it is that, and most listeners have heard of that before. All these systems are the best systems are designed not just to have human in the loop or clinician in the loop, but with protections to make sure the clinician doesn't fall out of the loop. So some of these technologies are going to be so convenient, or they already are so convenient, that just the effort to kind of double check the work is not going to be worth the squeeze, because they might find the tools accurate enough. So I've consulted with some note writing scribe companies that find that their clients, the clinicians, very rarely edit the outputs of their note taking. And so the imperative is how do we design systems that make it hard to fall out of the loop, so that they're not just useful and usable, but also ethical. So at no
Yeah.
point can fall out of the loop. And as I think about exposure therapy, I think of we never want uh, uh, these tools providing exposure therapy for us. They're really like I like to think about them like little like workshops to develop activities, but wouldn't want to use it
They're not
unsupervised.
replacing you. Yeah, they're not
Yeah,
replacing you.
yeah, because I think if you think of how these things were made, especially the general purpose ones, they're not trained on just exposure therapy. They're trained on all of human language and all different therapies. So these LLMs are like integrative psychologists at best. So really quickly, that therapy bot can start mixing in different practices that were never made to go with each other. So I've seen it. We try to create like scripts for it to follow, where it's a great exposure, but then at the end of it, it says, "Okay, now that you've read this script that was made for generalized anxiety disorder, now start doing some deep breathing to relax." I would never want a patient to do that. Exposure, feel the emotion. But GPT thinks it's supposed to do that because they've seen enough stuff out in the world that tells them that's what therapy looks like. So we always want to stay in the loop. And a good example of that is of really towing the line of uh, where you can easily fall out of the loop is patients that are already using LLMs for therapeutic benefit, and teaching them prompt engineering to have like just better therapeutic experiences. Good example of this would be a patient I saw with scrupulosity. As soon as they felt doubt about their salvation, they would go to GPT and say like what happened, and ask for biblical references to kind of make them feel like they we're okay and we're going to go to hell. All we have to do to take that avoidance machine and turn it into a good exposure therapy machine is give it a few prompts that said, by the way, remember I have OCD with scrupulosity, and anytime I request, a reassurance from you, do the exact opposite and give me the Bible quote that tells me I'm probably going to burn in hell for the rest of it. And that couple of prompts ruined her GPT. I remembered that, and we even gave the prompt, "Remember this at all times. Never let me, never forget that I might be seeking reassurance." So those chatbots can be used in very therapeutic ways, but it can't be the therapist. It could only
Yeah.
be the stimuli.
Yeah. I love that you're integrating as a part of the work that you do. It's not replacing you or the work that you do, right? So I love it. You continue to use it as a tool.
It
Uh,
might be helpful. We might learn a lot more. It might be better at doing general supportive therapy, but especially like for this podcast, we're talking to psychologists that work with severe psychopathology. We don't want to encourage like the use of it as a general supportive therapy, because quickly it could inflate whatever pathological process they're in, right? It could be sycophantic and kind of add to delusions. It could be very supportive and accommodating and just add to reassurance seeking for anxiety disorders. It could replace social relationships that people need to have. So again, like from the mindset of like they're not actually a therapist, but they're kind of like an integrative kind of agent that exists out there that's poorly trained but knows a whole bunch and can maybe be useful as stimuli, but we never want to give any of our responsibilities.
yeah.
That line you talked about, I like to think about it like the division of responsibilities. And we've done this for a long time. We've let Microsoft Word take over our spell check. We're all millennials and younger. We're horrible spellers because of that. So we're always giving some of our tasks to automation. We just need to be very vigilant of that as we have new automation.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been such an interesting conversation, Andrew. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your experience and your perspective on that. This has been really helpful. How do people contact you if they want to continue the conversation? If they've got questions for you, what's a good way to reach out?
Yeah, yeah. So I love talking to folks about this. So anyway, my email address at Emory is andrew.m.sherrill@emory.edu. Let's see, I'm on LinkedIn. I just recently discovered it's more than a place to find jobs. So I recently got on LinkedIn, and I'm on X. We're not too active because X has gotten kind of wonky. So email might be the best way. Another way people can contact me or interact with me is a new consultation group I've developed with some colleagues. It's called Evidence First Solutions. So the website is evidencefirstsolutions.com. So we aim to work with both clinicians, innovators, and clinical groups to help identify like science-based, evidence-based solutions to best integrate all the things we've talked about. And additionally, too, I want to plug one thing. We have a registry of clinicians that would like to participate in AI research. So like we could give a link to that. I think we will compensate you for just joining the registry, but there's a lot of, you could be a beta tester for some of the things we're developing. We do a lot of like prototype, like interface evaluations and things like that. We really want to know a lot about our potential users and your perspectives on how to make these, how to design and deploy these things in useful and usable ways. So I think maybe the show notes, maybe all of these links could be there, but I do love collaborating with folks. This is such an exciting time for everybody to be involved, especially the very technophobic people, because the part of that anxiety you experience is probably connected to your values of wanting to provide really good, high quality care. And I'd say like let's validate that there and see that you've got a place at the table.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. What's a tip or recommendation that you can leave us with, as we're wrapping up here?
Yeah, I'd say, well, I'll go back to being an exposure therapist. I'd say notice that like your attempts of avoiding this have not worked out for you in the long term. If you already feel like you're missing out on things, listen to that and ask yourself, what's like the next step? Like, what do you need to learn? As an exposure therapist, I'm always asking patients, what do you need to learn next? And if you feel like you're missing out on whatever it is, you're listening to this podcast, you're clearly taking a step, I'd ask yourself now, like, what is the next step to take? And what's like the experience you're not willing to have? And Can you design an exposure for yourself where you can experience what you're not willing to experience right now in order for you to learn something that's going to be adaptive?
Love that. I love that advice. How can you take that next step? So I really appreciate that. Andrew, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fantastic having you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Really, obviously enjoyed talking about this, and yeah, hope you and I get to know each other more and collaborate in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone else, if you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. Feedback is a gift, and we love gifts. We hope you will join us again.